Now, something else I must mention, speaking of prayers, I think every one of you has heard that prayers in our public schools is outlawed. What most of you probably don't know is it is not outlawed. Some schools in this country, particularly in New York, in Michigan, and in California, and folk, I've had students look this up. You want to look it up. Let's look up Muslim prayer rooms in public schools. These schools are setting up prayer rooms for Muslim students, where Muslim students can go at specified times and have their own private prayer session. And the ACLU does not say a word. Now, folks, these prayer rooms are made at taxpayer expense, and they are expensive. Why are they expensive? Because they're set up with Muslim trappings, with Muslim carpet, and you have to put thousands of dollars worth of plumbing because the Muslims both wash their feet before they pray. So you have to have plumbing installed. And the room has to be oriented towards, to where they know where Mecca is, in other words. Now, it's not just one. In Islam, the men and women worship in separate rooms. So these schools set up 2 prayer rooms, one for the men and one for the women. Now, my wife met one of my students over in Powder Springs one time, and he said, when he first said that, I've been saying it to you, we didn't believe it. So we went and looked it up. I looked it up recently myself. It is so. Have any of you heard this outside of the class here?
Yes.
Okay, a few of you have. Okay, a few of you have. All right. I didn't see any hands, but I heard a couple of yeses. Yeah, okay, yeah.
It sounded like you didn't like that.
Sounded like I didn't like it?
It sounded like you didn't.
Here's the thing about it now. If you're going to allow Muslims, should you not allow Christians also?
Everybody else too, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So what's, okay, we allow Muslims, but if you know something, my wife said, I have no problems with them allowing Muslims to set up prayer, even though it should be set up at Muslim expense.
Right.
Should be at Muslim expense, and if they allow Muslim, they should allow Christians also. Yes?
I guess it would depend. My high school, the kids that were Muslim had prayer time.
They had a prayer time, but not a separate room.
But they could leave the class. They
Oh,
didn't stay in the classroom. But my high school was mostly Turkish and Russian that were Muslims, so it would make much more sense.
Well, it varies from place to place. I've heard that too. That sometimes they'll just simply allow them to leave.
Christianity doesn't demand prayer 5 times a day.
That's what I was going to say also.
Well, yes,
so
that
I
is
think
true.
yeah.
But then again, Christianity is not allowed to express itself in any way, shape, form, or fashion in today's public schools.
Right.
Not even in the least little bit.
People get offended by it.
So, I mean, and I'll tell you something, folks. I mean, all right, I'm old enough. I was in the public schools as a student before they outlawed Bible reading and prayer. And I can
They
tell you
outlawed it
something.
from the
Public
professors, or
Professors,
teachers?
we're allowed to. We supposed to have academic freedom. Not that I do, but we have academic freedom. I'm talking about in elementary and high school.
Like you're not allowed to bring in a Bible into the school?
Students are allowed to, even though that has
Teachers
been
can't
questioned,
preach
has been
the Bible
challenged.
while-
Yeah,
But let me finish.
Muslims are not, the teachers are not.
The teachers are not allowed to
They're just
display a Bible.
Supplying a room for them to.
But let me tell you,
Right,
let me
that's
finish.
what
And then I'll let you talk. Let me finish. The public schools have gone super fast and super far downhill since Christian expression of any form was outlawed in the summer of 1962. At one time, folks, the public schools worked. Today, the public schools are beyond any hope or any chance of fixing. You don't have to agree with that if you don't want to, but I've had more than one student and say that they agree with it.
I'm just kind of confused.
Okay,
with what you're
but
saying.
that's,
I think it's 2 different things.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say too. I just feel like because of their religion and how intense and disciplined it is, them needing things like that makes sense. Whereas for us Christians, they go to church on Sunday for the most part, and that's perfectly fine.
well, still, I mean, if you're going to allow it for one,
You got a lot for
you should
everybody.
at least allow it for the other. Otherwise, you're just being inconsistent. You're being inconsistent. I mean, at least allow it But, I mean, you know, here's the problem. It might offend the persons who are not, well, fine and dandy folk. And I'll tell you something, I hear things and see things all the time that offends me, but I have to go on with it. I mean, you know, I see on TV, you know, something about that we evolved from ancestors with tails dangling from trees. Well, you know, I don't want, I mean, well, I do teach that to my children. Yeah, I do, quite a bit. I've taught them, and I teach them what's wrong with it. But I mean, to me, it's offensive. And of course, I see things all the time that offend me, but hey, all right, switch, all right, it brings me to the next point, folks. Something else. No Muslim is any harder against smoking tobacco than I am. Now, Muslims are against smoking tobacco. No Muslim is any harder against drinking alcohol than I am. But there's a big difference between me and them. I do not believe that these issues should be decided by the government. They should be decided by each person individually. Do I make my point? No, you decide whether or not you'll smoke or drink, and not the government. But in Islam, the government denies. I had a student one time, I mean, I said, if you happen to develop a problem with alcoholism, and if you drink, you just might. Whose fault is that? Your fault or the government allowed it? And Islamic student folks said, it's the fault of the government that allowed me to drink.
No, it's the person's fault.
It's true. If you make up your mind, if you develop a problem with alcoholism, or if I do, it's my fault. It's me. Now, again, no Muslim is any harder against adultery than I am. No Muslim is any harder against a lot of things than I am. But the difference is, I believe that these issues should be decided by each person individually.
Right, because in Muslim, they intertwine government with religion.
That's the difference. They intertwine governments, mosque and state. And folk, one of the reasons that Western civilization has progressed as far as it has is separation of church and state. And I want to hand it to the Roman Catholic Church that did a lot to separate church and state in Europe. The other places in the world didn't. Western Europe did, and then when the Protestant Reformation came along, separation of church and state was assumed. But the Roman Church did a lot than anything else that separate church. In places where church and state have not been separated, I'm talking about the Byzantine Empire right here, and Latin America in more recent times, the cultural level has been zero. Now, let me hasten to state in Latin America, they are doing a better job at separating church from state, and some Latin American countries are prospering. But Latin America had a problem throughout much of its history. They did not separate church from state. But Europeans did. Islam, they don't know what you mean by separation of religion and state. Well, now something else about Islam. The word Islam, by its very nature, it means submission. You're supposed to be subordinate. The sons are subordinate to their fathers. And what came out during the bombing in the Boston Marathon, even younger brothers are expected to obey the older brother. It's like next to the father in a family, the oldest brother is in charge, and all the younger brothers are to obey. So when the older brother decided, I'm going to bomb the Boston Marathon, the younger brother was expected to go along. Everybody is expected to be submissive. Now, folks, this is the very opposite of democracy, which is why these people cannot have democracy. Democracy and submission is like a truthful liar, an honest thief. It's like an oxymoron. Under democracy, you're free. Under Islam, you obey. There is no freedom. Not in the sense that we know it. Now, why is this important? About 3 years ago, I had a student who was about my age sitting in one of my classrooms at other colleges. I don't see a connection between allowing drinking and scientific progress. But another student spoke up. All right, the point I'm going to make, folks, is the Islamic world has made no scientific progress to speak of in 1,000 years. If the Wright brothers had grown up in Islam, would they have invented the airplane? If Thomas Edison had grown up in Islam, would he have invented anything at all? I mean, maybe you've never thought of it that way, and you haven't. Personally, I don't think so. Freedom is what leads to invention. Freedom to dissent. Most discoverers have been people who said, I disagree with the norm. In Islam, you better not disagree. You might have your head chopped off. But where you have like Christopher Columbus, he said, I believe I can get west, I believe I can get to China by sailing west. He was in the center. The Wright brothers, just before they invented the airplane, a professor of all things, published an article that mankind would never fly in a heavier than air machine. He proved it mathematically. The problem was his figures did not include every figure, every equation that should have been included. You can make anything true if you only include part of the equations. But he proved by mathematics that man would never fly heavier than air machine. The Wright brothers disagreed with that. They flew one. The freedom to dissent is what brings about discoveries. When there's no freedom to dissent, nobody discovers anything. All right, any discussion? Now, I had an Islamic woman in my class last fall who said, and I was surprised she said, the main reason they haven't discovered anything is they keep their women suppressed. I said, I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm surprised that you would say that. Yes, they do keep the women, and I think that has a lot to do because women have become scientists in the West and have made discoveries. One that comes to mind is Madame Curie. Did a lot of her research, laid the groundwork for the discovery of nuclear reactors and even atomic weapons. But again, they keep their people suppressed. Now, when I say they haven't invented anything,